Okay, thanks. Ready to go.
Okay, so yeah, the origins of the VCG, Vegan Compassion Group. As Brian said, I'd worked for Animal Aid for a long time, 40 odd years, although I wasn't director for all of that period, far from it. A very fortunate position from my point of view. And before that, I'd worked for Compassion and World Farming. So from a 26-year-old until till my retirement, and even a bit before that as a volunteer, I'd been involved in animal rights around vegans, doing work that I believed in. It was, I think, a very privileged kind of life. And just to show that, people can set things up. Some of them are good, some of them are for good reasons, but there are selfish reasons involved as well. Because I knew that I could well be struggling when I'd retired. If I wasn't involved in the same kind of thing in some way. So I did have selfish motives for doing it. Also, takes a certain amount of arrogance to set up an organization with your own sort of set of beliefs. I mean, veganism means different things to a lot of different people. To me, it's always been in the widest sense, about promoting kindness and compassion, fighting injustice, fighting cruelty, of course, standing up for the suffering, standing up for those who had less, looking after the environment, not seeing any real difference between animals and people in as far as they could all suffer equally, and standing up for those kind of values. So those were the kind of feelings behind it. Veganism was never for me about one specific thing, or particularly about food. It's one of the lovely subplots that it turns out that it's healthy, and it's so good for the environment, and you can feed far more people on an animal-free diet. But for me, it was always the much wider values of kindness and compassion and things. And the VCG was always going to be, when I set it up, a lot about feeding hungry people and suffering people and people who had less. But it also happened to coincide with, in this country, I don't know who's here, but the older ones amongst you will remember VegFam and Hippo, which were two organisations that were involved in feeding people in countries where people were economically poor. And they both happened to pack up for different reasons in much the same period. So there was nothing in this country doing this kind of work. The other thing, I suppose, about veganism is it may be true for some of you, but I have to say it is the nearest thing I have to a religion. It's not a religion to me, but the values that it represents go very deep. They're the core of my being, in a way that some people have their religion, and being part of a vegan community is very important to me. I always was, as I pointed out, and that is very central to me. But I also know the dangers of that, in that the worst things about religion is that wanting to be part of a community and becoming part of a community means you start disagreeing and looking down on other people's community and think there's some kind of superiority about it. So when I did set up the Vegan Compassion Group, I really wanted it to be, and this is a phrase I use a lot, I'm obviously very pleased with it, but it does kind of point out, I wanted it to be exclusively vegan, so everything we would do would be promoting veganism and vegan at its core. But I wanted it to be open to a lot of people, and so I think the phrase was exclusively vegan, but not exclusive to vegans. So because feeding people who are economically poor is not a value that's exclusively felt by vegans. Interesting thing is, of course, that almost all the food aid that goes to help people in need, in emergencies or in poorer countries, is always vegan, because you can feed far more people. And when you look at the big charities, they, all the food they send, almost certainly in emergencies, grains and plant-based food. but they just don't make anything of it. You know, they don't have it as a, it's just the way it practically is. And I found this, I was very interested in trying to find some project in Yemen, because I was reading about Yemen a few months ago, and as it happened, I couldn't find anything that was suitable for the kind of work we do. But I looked at the 2 or 3 big charities that were sending stuff, and of course it was all grains and it was all vegan. So that's why I say this kind of thing can appeal to non-vegans, and I wanted very much to appeal to them as well. The other thing is, of course, that it's all very small scale what we do. It's essentially run by me. We have trustees and we've set up charity. So there's no money involved, there's no expenses involved. The trustees don't take expenses. Every bit of money that comes in goes to the causes, and the people we work with are small charities. Some of them are bigger than the VCG. So, you know, it's one of the great advantages of small. It's on a very personal scale, both financially and personally. A key element is building up close relationships with the people we work with, most of whom have been to date fellow vegan organisations who are really inspiring, the work they do in much more difficult circumstances than mine or ours. But not always vegan as well. You know, we work with organisations that are sympathetic to what we do. I'm sure that they respect what we do, and I feel confident that, you know, they won't cheat on our values in any way. So that's the kind of way in which, in various ways, we've tried to spread the thing out just beyond mere veganism. Which started, as I said, when I was retiring. I think it was 2016, and I immediately, it wasn't set up as a charity or anything, and we called it the Living Without Cruelty Trust to begin with. And the first project we got involved with was in Ethiopia. I actually went to meet the person who ran an organisation in Ethiopia called the International Fund for Africa, who was just happened to be in England at that time, actually at the Brighton Veg Fest. And so I went to meet him and talk with him, and felt I could trust him. You know, felt there was some sort of rapport with the organisation, and we agreed to fund a project feeding children at a primary school in Addis Ababa. And it's very well done. Everything was very nutritionally balanced. They employed 2 cooks from the parents who produced the food, and they were very carefully thought out menus. And we got the chance to get that checked as well, because a couple of years later, that in Exeter, I live in Devon, in Exeter, was an Ethiopian woman who ran a fair trade shop, and she was visiting home, and I asked her to go and examine this, and she wasn't vegan, and she came back full of praise and enthusiasm for everything about the project, which was very reassuring. The other thing we wanted to do was actually, Brian, sorry, we're sort of onto the slides now, if you can produce them. So
hold on a second, let me see if I can pull this beginning. Okay, I don't know whether can you people see that, or do I need to share my screen?
Yeah. Is everybody happy? Can we carry on?
Can you see the screen? Yeah, I can see it. That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, good.
So this is children at Hana Primary School in Addis Ababa. It's a bit later. They only got this classroom. They used to be fed in a shed, and I wish I'd put one of those slides up. Anyway, so they got these very well balanced meals every day. So that was that project. And then at the time, I was very keen to do something more local. You know, the kind of think global, act local idea. So next slide, please, Brian. Yeah, so this is, there was a vegan restaurant in Exeter, and we started putting on sort of welcome to refugee meals. So we invited refugees to come, and we have a local vegan catering firm called Fair Foods, who some of you might have met at some of the Animal Aid vegan fairs. Lovely people, and they put on, they cook the food at a very discounted rate. And the vegan restaurant, which sadly is no longer with us, gave us the premises for next to nothing, and we invited refugees to come along and share a meal. And it was very, very enlightening for us, because to meet some of these people, most of them, I mean, this is obviously a family, I can't actually remember where they were from, but most of them are the young men and migrants that get so decried by the government at the moment. And we were just, all of us that were involved in it, were just so impressed with their manners. They'd endured some terrible things we got to learn about, you know, people who'd been, boys who'd been sexually assaulted in Libya, and all kinds of terrible hardships they'd endured to get here. And they were the most polite, their gratitude, they expressed their gratitude. They were older than their years, really, for what they'd experienced. And so I very much, having had that personal experience, even more so, you know, hate the kind of language that's used about migrants in this country at the moment. I find it hideous. Anyway, so next slide, please, Brian. Yeah, and then we got to hear, talking about the vegan community, there's 3 or 4 organizations that I know of around the world that do similar work, mostly actually, I think all in the States. And so you get to know people, and they got to hear about what I was doing and tell me what they were doing. And we got to a point where that they would tell us about different projects and where people needed help. And so we got set up this next project, which was school feeding program. I love this photo of kids in Nepal, children in Nepal. And this was done with an organisation called Grassroots Movement in Nepal. You know, I've never quite established whether they're completely vegan. They mostly just build schools, but certainly I think they must be, because all of the food that they were providing at the time for schools was vegan. And so we started feeding these children in Nepal. This stopped after about a year or so, because the regional government where we were doing this in Dang province decided that they were going to take over and make sure all the kids were fed at school, which didn't happen before. Apparently there's a certain amount of corruption in that system, but anyway, we were redundant, so that project only lasted about a year. Okay, next please, Brian. Yes, so all this was going, these are the things we were doing. We'd actually just started one other project, feeding the homeless in Exeter at the homeless shelter, but we only managed 1 meal before COVID. That was the month before COVID came along. And of course, COVID changed our work as it changed everything else. So the first thing we started moving. I very much wanted it when I set up to be about long-term projects, trying to help people to help themselves in the long run. And you know, building sustainable ideas. We said whenever we funded any of these long-term projects, we'd do it for at least 3 years and see where we go from there. But emergency food aid had to come in with COVID, of course, because in these very economically poor countries, there's no health system, there's no benefit system, so people were in real trouble. And in Nepal, I don't know whether any of you remember, when the pandemic hit India very badly, a lot of the Nepalese go to India to work, and they were all out of work, and they were faced with these terrible and dangerous journeys back to Nepal. So anyway, we started helping a grassroots movement in Nepal set up these emergency feeding stations, and that's a picture from that. Next, please, Brian. Yeah, and we got involved with some animal work at the time as well. It's something I'd like to do a lot more of, some non-human animal work. We had done one other project before I didn't mention, which was to help an animal sanctuary called Folly Animal Sanctuary. I don't know if you know it, near Tunbridge in Kent. Fantastic place, run by, well, set up by 2. One person who used to work for Animal Aid and her husband. And we helped them. They're brilliant at saving wildlife, and we helped them we built an aviary on their behalf where the birds that they'd rescued and treated could go to learn how to fly before being released into the wild. So that was one of the first projects we did. And then this animal project, and this is in Nepal as well. And I can't remember the name of the organization, sorry, but this was all vegan. They were vegan activists working with an animal sanctuary, and they made this food. I can remember carrots and vegetables were amongst it, and grains, and I think tapioca, they put things in for vitamins, and they'd go around at night and feed all the stray dogs. So there's a big stray dog population, street dog population in Kathmandu, but when the tourists were there, it wasn't so bad because they could all get, they were all fed by the tourists and by the restaurants. It's sort of part of the life, apparently. I've never been. And of course, all that went in lockdown, and these dogs were starving, and these brave people, because like everybody else, everybody was scared or most people were scared of COVID at the time. They'd go out at night and feed all these stray dogs, and so we helped to pay for that. As I said, something I don't know how it's happened that we've concentrated so almost exclusively on humans, but I'd like to do a lot more with non-human animals as well. Thanks, Brian. Next, please. Yeah. This is a photo out of order, but I will deal with it. In 2021, we started working with a local organisation, Devon Development Education, who are not a vegan organisation, but they had a problem with feeding people during the pandemic. Uganda shut down. Uganda shut down for a long time, and families had no food, and so we started doing emergency feeding them. And then we went on to keep that photo in your mind, and let's go on to the next and see what happened.
They are vested in order, okay.
Yeah, no, they were in the order I showed you, but
Okay.
the wrong order.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So we were feeding people in Nepal, in Uganda, and also in Ethiopia. Now, what happened in Ethiopia is the schools closed down, but the organisation and therefore us didn't stop feeding the children, but we switched to giving them take-home rations, and these are the kids waiting for the rations. So all these grains, all different grains, all grown locally, so the farmers are guaranteed an income locally, and then mixed into a nutritional mix with all the vitamins and minerals by what were the two cooks. And there's take-home rations go every month to each family. This is still going. It started in COVID. So the last couple of years, we've been feeding 124 families. The rations are such that there's a bit more than needed for the child that's at school, and hopefully there's enough to feed the whole family. And the advantages of this project is our big project, really. It's the most costly, it feeds more people, and we've got more feedback really on how the school achievements have gone up. School attendance is really important because the kids are getting fed, and obviously because they're well fed, they're attaining more. We had one lovely letter from one of the pupils, ex-pupils, who's gone on to, I think, training to be a doctor, about how it helped. So this is means tested. I mean, even in a country like Ethiopia, where poverty, people have got very little, it has to be mean tested because we couldn't afford to feed all the kids. So as I said, it's going to 124 families, has been for the last couple of years, about that number. And they take home this mixture every month. Yeah, next please, Brian.
Sorry.
Yeah, so yeah, as pandemic started to go to ease, there was still a lot of families in Nepal who had nothing really, and so we switched from those feeding stations to we could only afford to feed 10 families, but they got take-home rations this is in Nepal, every month to save them from extreme hunger. So that's in Nepal. Yep, next please. Yeah, and this is going on to now. After a year of feeding those 10 families, we were starting to, we talked about renewing it and keeping these families because their circumstances weren't improving. And I was pretty keen. It just seemed to me we could be doing this perpetually. And I asked, was there any way we could look at long-term solutions for even these families, finding them some way? And we came up with this idea, which is a trial project at the moment. We're building polytunnels for 5 of the families. We've built families, and you can see they're quite big, where they can grow more vegetables and tomatoes, because there's a problem with the monsoon season becoming heavier and heavier and destroying crops. And this is late, by having the polytunnels, they can get 2 harvests a year rather than 1. And the idea was they can actually grow some excess food to sell at market, which happened around November time. And I think these are tomatoes that this family were going to take to market. So it's trying to find a long-term solution. One drawback of this is, of course, polytunnels involve plastic, and we thought hard about whether we should do it, but we thought that the gains outweighed the losses. So we've got the 5 polytunnels now. We're going to assess it later in the spring, see how it's worked, and see how we take it forward. Okay, thanks. Yeah, so we have come past the pandemic now. So this is last year, because no sooner had the pandemic ended than the country, Ethiopia, was involved in this vicious civil war, which I don't know how much you know about it. There is a ceasefire now, hopefully, which is going to hold. And IFA, were telling us what terrible trouble they were having with their resources, because they were trying to do some work with refugee camps. Actually, they're not refugees, because they're displaced people, from people coming from the war zone. And so we decided we could help, and we fed the youngest children on sort of milk replacement, all vegan food. The young children who were really suffering at the time at this particular refugee camp in the north of the country. These are some of the children, though I think the children that we fed were actually much younger than that. Yeah, and that's for sorry for another project we did, which I didn't put a photo in last year, was in Gaza. I was delighted to be able to do something in Gaza with an organisation, actually a vegan organisation, very, very, very small, even smaller than ours, and which we planted 100 olive trees on public land there. And also there were some potatoes as well for the farmers, but mainly the olive trees, which will last 150 years and hopefully provide food and oil for generations to come. And also there was a kind of spiritual dimension to that, because the olive tree represents peace and for the Palestinian people, and we were glad to be able to do that. Yeah. Okay. Next, please, Brian. Yeah. So late last year, we started to get involved with in Ukraine. Came across a thing for vegan organisations, vegan organisation, and they were feeding people in what was a vegetarian restaurant they'd taken over, and were feeding people in Lviv, which is to the west of Ukraine, far, it's such a huge country, a long way from the war zone. But refugees were coming, fleeing west towards Poland, and some of them staying in Lviv, and there was a restaurant there, and they were feeding people daily. So we provided, can't remember how many meals, but they were feeding 300 a day. I think it was about 600 initially, and then the following month we were asked to provide some food parcels for the military, and which we did. It seemed a very strange idea as vegans and essentially pacifists, providing food for the military, but I think self-defense, when self-defense is a good enough reason to support them, and I think Ukraine is clearly a case of self-defense. and then the next year, I think we then fed some more meals there. And this year we've been doing something a bit different, which I'll come on to in a minute. It's a strange thing about Ukraine. I mean, obviously this is short-term emergency work. We're back to that. We're not making any huge long-term difference, but something about Ukraine gets to us all, gets to so many of us, and we're just delighted to really be involved and to be dealing with these people in Ukraine who are still keeping to their vegan values and spreading them, as we'll come on to. Next, please, Brian. Yeah, so this year we've actually been working with a different organisation, who particularly inspire me. And this was the first thing we did in a town called Kolki. This is a refugee centre. Kolki seems to be a long way away from the war zone. I hadn't heard of it. It's west, but a bit north. This is a house, as you can see, it's or some kind of building that's converted as a home for 55 refugees at any one time. And we provided, I think this was in January, something like 900 meals. And these are great, all these people, they get their vegan leaflets at the front. And so that was the first time we'd worked with this particular new organisation. And then next, Brian, please. And this last month, we've done a similar thing in Dnipro, where we fed something like 850. It was supposed to be 1,000, but they've got food inflation in food inflation costs in Ukraine, so it was only turned out to be 150. But displaced people can't get any food. Dnipro has been hit much more by bombing. At the end of that, we were sent this video by our contact, saying it was a heartwarming video. It was only a minute long, minute and a half, I think, and it was in Ukrainian, so I couldn't understand a word. But it was typical of the people you saw in the previous slide. You know, obviously protected against the cold, quite elderly. And in front of them were all these empty plates, and they were clearly just saying thank you. They were saying thank you to us for providing the food, but it went on a bit, so there was clearly more than that. So I asked one of the refugees we have in our little town here, Ukraine, if she'd come around and translate it for me, which she did, and they were saying thank you, but they were also saying that the food was very interesting. They said very interesting, very healthy, and how nice it was to be able to have full stomachs, and also thanking the people who served them, who said they were very nice. And I'm just overwhelmed by these people, these young vegans really, and they're doing this great work, and at the same time they're still believing that they're still saying we can still convert people to veganism in Ukraine during this time, and it's just something very refreshing about them. But anyway, the woman who came to do this translation for me, I'd seen around and said hello to, but I didn't really know. And I asked her about her circumstances, and she was here with her daughter, and she'd gone back to Ukraine a month ago to get her dog, which is actually how I knew, because I'd met the dog. And then she just out of the blue said her husband had been killed in August. It was really hit me, as it does now. It was wonderful because she was so moved that we were helping in Ukraine as well. So it's just something. Look, there are places in the world every bit as bad as Ukraine, if not worse. And part of what we do is geared by the relationships we can build up with other organisations. But there's something about it being so close that does. Well, I'm taken in by it. I don't know whether everybody is. It does hit harder. I think it's that last slide, Brian.
Yeah, let me stop the show.
So can I get back to being you? Yeah. Yes. So the next thing we're going to do, and I'm really excited by this. So we were our contacts in Ukraine. I asked what they were doing and how we could help, and they said, well, in April we're running a vegan festival called Vegan Weekend, and I looked at this and said, well, yeah, that's great. I'm really glad you're doing it. It's fantastic. You know, we really enjoy our vegan festivals and things. But I don't think it's anything we can be involved in because we want to be involved in directly helping. You know, and then I thought about it a bit more, talk about to the other trustees about it and things. And we suddenly thought, well, actually, this is a great idea. There's another aspect to this. It is a fundraiser as well. And the fundraiser is for women in the serving in the forces to make sure that they have vegan food. With these people in Ukraine, you can register if you're in the forces as vegan, and they provide food parcels. So it's to provide food parcels to the military and also clothing, vegan clothing for them, and. They're very confident. They did have a festival last year that they will get a lot more money than we're putting in. We're only part funding it. Fedge Fund in the States are also funding it. So that's something we're doing. And from sort of being very hesitant about it, I'm really excited about it because not only do I think we're going to raise more money, you know, it's like an investment in a way. If we're going to support in Ukraine, we're going to be able to feed more people doing this than if we with the amount of money we could afford. But also, what triumph of to be able to hold a festival. You know, triumph for the and how good for their mental health that they're going to be able, you know, for the vegan, not just the vegan community. And they're so positive about it, and you know, it's going to have all the things that we enjoy at our vegan festivals. They're going to have food. They're going to have talks about food. They're going to have music. They're going to have a comedian. But some of the lectures will be a bit different because they're going to have people talking about the you know, being in the military and being vegan. And I don't know whether some people will think you know, it doesn't fit in with our ethos, but I think it's really exciting. I'm really looking forward to hearing about it when it takes place towards the end of April. So that's more or less what we do. How are we doing for time? Yeah, I'm doing about the right for time. So yeah, we as I said, it's all about the really exciting thing for me has been building up these relationships with these organizations and these people, this vegan community worldwide, and I'm astonished by their commitment and their bravery, and they make, you know, make you feel very humble, really. And the future is, I would like really us to be more about long-term solutions, but sometimes the world doesn't accept that. As I said, I tried to define what it meant to me and veganism, and I'm going to read just one little thing to end, which is just an extract from my favourite book, well, my favourite vegan book, The Universal Kinship, written in 1906 by John Howard Moore, an American, who was certainly a veggie. I don't know whether he was a vegan because, of course, the word didn't exist, but and this he wrote this, which sort of summarizes what I feel. I love this. I'm not going to find it. In their phenomena of life, the inhabitants of the earth display endless variety. They swim in the waters, soar in the skies, squeeze among the rocks, clamber among the trees, scamper over the plains, and glide among the grounds and grasses. Some are born for a summer, some for a century, and some flutter their little lives out in a day. They are black, white, blue, golden, all the colours of the spectrum. Some are wise and some are simple. Some are huge and some are microscopic. Some live in castles and some in bluebells. Some roam over continents and seas, and some doze their little daydream away on a single dancing leaf. But they are all the children of a common mother and the co-tenants of a common world. Why they are here in this world rather than somewhere else, why the world in which they find themselves is so full of the undesirable, and whether it would not have been better if the ball on which they ride and riot had been in the beginning sterilized, are problems too deep and baffling for most of them. But since they are here, and since they are too proud or too superstitious to die, and are surrounded by such cold and wolfish immensities, what would seem more proper than for them to be kind to each other and helpful and dwell together as loving and forbearing members of one great family? So thank you for listening, and if anybody's got questions, I'll try and answer them. don't sleep. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Fantastic. And it is. I know you mentioned there was a part of that was heartwarming. I mean, the work that you're doing is heartwarming, and listening to those stories. I'm just going to just a few points. Firstly, if anybody has any questions, just to raise your hand if you can. Otherwise, if you want to put the in the chat box, you can ask your question if you want to remain anonymous. Second question is, have you actually been able to go out to any of these places, or you've just been using the contacts that are out there to send you those pictures?
I've just used the contacts. I mean, I don't feel it's necessary for me to go traveling around the world to see these things. I mean, it's all based on trust, and of course that trust can be misplaced. We can all be wrong about people, but I do get a sense we do get asked. You know, people pick up what we're doing through the internet, and we get some inquiries which are obvious scams.
Right.
Some inquiries which may not be, but there's just not enough there, even if we had the resources to help. And one or two other things that, you know, we try and see if there are other people who might help. But so I take as much care as I can to kind of build up trust, but it is down to my you know, actually not entirely, because a couple of them are the American people I told you about who have been to see the places. So yeah. Thank you. And the Ukraine, you just only have to see what these young people are doing. You know, I'd be amazed if they were anything other than, you know, completely committed and completely honest.
And the next question is how up till now, how do you get your money? And tied in with that is, what can we and the viewers do to help you?
Okay, well, that's good. Well, I will at the beginning. Okay, well, I put some money in to start with. I have a stepson who had a business, and he and his you know, several people helped him, and I got to realize that without some sort of start, you were never going to get anywhere. So originally, I just paid for the first year in the Ethiopian things, and then, you know, we had something we could show people that we were doing, and so we have you know, we've got a small band of people who support us financially, but some incredibly generously. You know, for some people it does strike a real chord. I'm delighted, you know, they with what we do, and they support it very generously. We've grown a bit in the last couple of years, you know, so we're able to do more. We were able to do more that last year, and we'll be able to do more this year. But yeah, funds, obviously, if you want anybody who can donate it. These times are very hard, I know that. You know, there's a donation box on our website, Vegan Compassion Group. And they can keep up to date with what we're doing on Facebook if they want to support any particular campaign we do. We're small enough to be able to do that, you know, to meet people's direct need. So that's, yeah, that really is it. We need money, and we need people to spread what we're doing. We got an annual report. There's the annual report you can get from the website, which you can read about all the projects from last year up until December, and you know, that tells you a lot about. Oh, I've gone. No, I haven't.
So this is the website for those. It is the vegancompassiongroup.co.uk. Yeah, and there's details about the projects on there, about the news, current news, and there's I said the donate button for those that want to help out on that. We just need really people to know more about us. We've got the Facebook page, in which, you know, we try to keep up to date, but it's not the sort of thing where, other than fundraising, you know, people can, well, if people have actually visited anywhere and feel there's things that are worth supporting, we'll look at them. But clearly we're still very small, and that has all its advantages. But its disadvantages, of course, you're limited, you know. Yeah. I know John's got a question. Let me hold on a second, John. Let me add a spotlight in for you. Can you unmute yourself, please? That's it.
Yes, hello. You spoke very well, despite being separated from your notes, by the way.
Thank you. Thanks.
I was just wondering, where often when there's wars on, people value life a bit more because they're surrounded by death.
Yeah.
And certainly in Ethiopia and Ukraine, where wars have been raging, do you think in those countries they're maybe more likely to take on board the ideas of veganism because they see death staring themselves in the face and lose relatives in the wars? Do you think there may be that impact?
I think it will with some people. I mean, the counter argument to that is, you know, when you're in the midst of that, and how can we imagine it? Have you got time to think about anything but survival? I suppose that's the opposite argument. I should have said a bit more. You know, we don't shout veganism from the rooftops. It's at the core of what we do is vegan. It's there. We tell people, but there's an old something that Mahatma Gandhi said that always struck me. You know, the only real way to promote vegetarianism, as in his case, was by showing its daily beauties. So by the way you live, you show kindness, you show compassion. You know, it's not a shouty way what we do of promoting veganism. That's not to say, you know, I was young and shouty once, and I think it's, you know, we need that as well. But we're seeping those values, and certainly the only one that I've had personal experience with was when we were feeding the refugees in Exeter, and certainly one or two of those got very interested in veganism, and they were, you know, they became very respectful of what we were doing. So I can only answer your question that far, really.
Yeah. Okay. No. Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.
Spotlight. Paul, are you okay for me to spotlight you? Paul Appleby.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hello.
Okay.
Hi.
Hold on a second.
Hi, Paul.
Yeah.
Hi, Mark. Mark, great talk. I wouldn't believe you haven't given a talk for 4 years. Mark, have you received any support from the national vegetarian and vegan organisations in the UK? Or they, you know, have you approached them, or do they sort of say, well, you're doing a great job, but we've got other priorities?
Well, I approach them in as far as we send them press releases, we send them our annual report. I mean, VON, which I know is not one of the big organisations, Vegan Organic Network, have published an article about us. But we haven't had any response, is the honest answer from writing to the Vegan Society or the Vegetarian Society. Now I've worked in a bigger organisation, and I know things can get tossed aside and left. I know, so I can't tell you the exact reason, but no, we do send press releases and things, and we've had no response.
Thank you.
It's a shame.
Yeah, well, I hope maybe
Right.
that will change. I hope that will change, and maybe that, you know, maybe I should have been making more effort in that direction. We are going. One organisation which I must praise is of course VegFest, who've been incredibly supportive. And at the Brighton VegFest, and whether everybody's going, not if you're in London, not that far. You know, they've already sent out a mailing. I think they're paying for a leaflet to be given to everybody about us, and I think we've got some sort of partners for the event, and they've invited me to come and speak. But if you've heard me, I don't think I'll be saying much different. So yeah. You know, Tim at VegFest has been fantastic. Yeah,
great to hear. Thank you. I'm going to wind up there. I'm going to say a really big thank you to Mark. I don't know if I can get everybody to unmute. I'll see if I can. Hold on a second.
If nobody claps, I'll take it that they
Okay,
couldn't.
I'm going to clap on behalf of everybody.
Thank you very much.